Welcome to Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman. We are recording live from Black Hat 2019. We're in the suite at Mandalay Bay. Joining me is Mark Batchelor, Chief Solutions Architect with Ping Identity.
Yep.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we're going to talk API security, and this is an interesting topic for me. So a little background, just so you understand where I'm coming from. My last company was a container security company called Layered Insight.
Okay.
And I've been doing research on the application side even since the day I was at Tenable. And this is a really interesting challenge I think we have as we think about digital transformation, the way applications are being built, and the proliferation of microservices, containers, et cetera,
Yep.
right? And so I want to start a little bit with the problem statement. API security, first of all, I think we see APIs, the proliferation of APIs going crazy.
Yep.
I think there's a challenge with identifying where APIs are, let alone all the other things. So let's start with the problem statement a little bit. How does Ping look at this?
Sure. So Ping kind of looks at everything with an identity lens, right? And so not only just sort of discovering where the APIs are, but also the security around them, and not necessarily the raw security, but the identity security around who's accessing that API.
Mhm.
How do you access that API? And then what are you doing when you are accessing that API?
Right.
So for Ping, pretty much everything has an identity lens,
Right.
and that's the lens that we look at it through.
Yeah, and if you think about it, right, each API needs to authenticate to
Yep.
something,
Mhm.
right? But how do you know where those APIs are to know whether they're being controlled by Ping's authentication solutions, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's got to be one of those first interesting challenges, right?
It is. So what's interesting about APIs for me at least is that much like websites used to be, if you go back 10, 15 years, they might just pop up, right? And they weren't necessarily in sort of a realm. It's the same thing with APIs now. It's not rogue, but you might just see an API show up in an enterprise
Mhm.
somewhere that some developer wrote and kind of started using it, right? So you get that kind of shadow IT thing going on for APIs, and there isn't necessarily a lot of security around it. So what a lot of companies have done is they've put, API gateways in place, right? But you're only as good as the APIs that your gateway is managing,
Right.
right? So if APIs are showing up somewhere else, what do you do about it, right? And we have a couple of products that can help with that. Specifically, one we call it Ping Intelligence, which we did an acquisition last year of a company called Elastic Beam that does some of that in the space,
Mhm.
right? So a little bit of API discovery, a little bit of artificial intelligence around APIs to figure out how to secure them in general. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're right. A new application or an existing application and a new function
Yep.
spins up a brand new microservice because it's containerized. It comes up, and now there's a whole bunch of new things communicating to that API endpoint,
Right.
and nobody knew it was there,
Right.
right? And it's happening daily.
Without question. Yeah.
It's not like the old waterfall approach where it would take a few months or whatever to get a release out. I mean, this stuff could happen on a daily basis, and so one of the big challenges I see with API security is just knowing where all those new API endpoints are.
Right. Well, not only can it happen quick, but it can happen without you even knowing it, right? So you may be running
Mhm.
a vended product that you upgrade, and now there's a new API endpoint available that you were unaware of.
Right.
Right. So that's entirely possible. And I don't know what the statistics are around it, but some of the biggest attacks in the last 5 or 6 years have all been around APIs for the most part, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's important to
Exactly.
be able to figure that out. Right.
So some discovery capabilities.
Yep.
I assume across multiple platforms, because where I see the proliferation is probably three primary places. In the cloud.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You've got a lot of API communications in your cloud environments now. Your core applications have a lot of API endpoints.
Yep.
And if you're doing mobile into those, there's a huge footprint from a mobile back to app kind of
Right.
communication, right?
Right.
Are those the three primary buckets? Are there more?
Those are basically the big three. So the way we look at it and the way our product is kind of tailored, right, is we're tailored for the enterprise, right? So, the enterprise may have their stuff running in Amazon or Google or Azure, right? And we can sit in front of that to protect it, right?
Okay.
They may be sitting on premise, whatever it happens to be. It could be a vended product, could be their own,
Right.
right? We can sit in front of it there. And we run in a couple different modes, right? So we can run as a proxy and sit in front of a bunch of stuff, and that's how we can do discovery,
Okay.
right? So you force API traffic through it, and we can see new APIs as they come
Yep.
up, right? Report on them, and you can decide what to do with them. Or the other mode that we run in, and arguably more popular mode actually, is that we run as a sort of a plugin to other gateways, right?
Okay.
So you may have deployed already. Pick your large gateway vendor of choice, right? You may have already deployed it. We can plug into that, and they consume our AI engine,
Okay.
right? Does that make
Got it.
sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So now I've got all my APIs discovered. I know where they all are. Okay.
Yep.
Problem one down.
Yep.
Now what? Right. And now it's all about detecting potential attacks across those API endpoints. So now where does Ping kind of step in and start to look at aspects of the detection problem?
Yeah, so the way we do that, regardless of whether or not you're in gateway mode or running as a proxy mode, right, is we have an AI engine that we run that is on premise in this case, right,
Okay.
or in your cloud,
Yep.
right, and we'll run in discovery mode, let's call it, for however long we need to run to gather enough data to figure out what is normal for your APIs.
Yeah. So you're
right?
doing behavior analysis
Exactly.
of the APIs under kind of just run it. Let's see what it does and baseline it.
Right, it's unsupervised learning at this
Yeah.
point, right? So
Yep.
we're just paying attention to it, right?
Yeah.
And then once we've decided that we have enough traffic, right, we've seen enough of the API traffic to make a informative decision, we flip over to supervised mode, right? And once we're in supervised mode, then we can start blocking, we can start informing, and we can start doing a whole bunch of different reporting so that, let's say, a stolen token attack is happening. So someone went off and stole an OAuth token, right? And they're trying to reuse it. We can detect that now because we saw it the first time when we issued it the first time,
Right.
right? The second time around, it's coming from somewhere else. We can detect that and block it, literally stop that traffic from happening. And we can do some really interesting stuff. We can detect slow attacks as well, right? So just because we paid attention to the behavioral, and that's also what lets us do some of the detection for new APIs is that we've never seen it before. What do you do with it, right? So block it, and then once we set it up, you're good to go.
Yeah, you block it, and then the developer screen because you just blocked their new API endpoint. You're like, oh, okay, that's you. So let's put that into the inventory.
Right.
Now let's monitor that
Yep.
for a period of time and understand its behavior.
Yep.
And then start to look for anomalies across those behavior baselines.
Right. And the behavior piece is really the interesting portion of it, to me at least, is that, let's say, for example, you have a banking API, right? And it's normal for somebody to check their account, maybe transfer some money, maybe log out after that, transfer from account to account or something like that, right? But it's not normal for that same person to, log in, transfer a whole bunch of stuff, a bunch of different places, and then come back out. The pattern in which you use the API actually makes a difference too. Right?
And can you monitor it down to that user endpoint layer or not?
Not yet. So to the specific user,
Yeah.
not yet. We're working on that, but not yet, right?
Okay.
But we can monitor the traffic pattern. So my banking app, right, generally does these things, right?
And so when you see something malicious in the normal behavior of that app, that potentially flags something, but you can't do it on an individual basis. You're looking at it from an application endpoint, API endpoint perspective.
Yeah, and maybe a bad actor's not using the app; they're going directly after the APIs. The pattern in which they do it is generally different from what the app would do, right? So we can detect that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So alert, I imagine.
Yep.
Block.
Yep.
A lot of people blocking or no?
A lot of people. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It's funny. Certainly, you end up with some false positives in the beginning, right? Once you flip the switch, it just is the nature of the beast. But most people want to ultimately end up at a blocking state, right? At some point.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
It just usually takes time, right? You got to build that level of trust, make sure you get the false positives out of the system, because what we're dealing with here are primarily critical applications. You're talking to enterprise customers, right? So by blocking, you don't want to block something that's valid because you don't want to break the application.
Right. So people are getting there with it. Let's put it that way, right? They all want to get to a blocking state. Some are there, and in general, many are reporting at the moment. So,
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously all your reporting requirements and the other things that you need to track and trend
Yep.
are all there.
Right.
Any integrations with the DevOps teams and tools today? Because if I think about developers, right?
Yep.
They're developing code, they're releasing code, it's out in production.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are monitoring aspects of what's going on. Some of that data might be interesting to the DevOps team. Have you thought about how that potentially closes the loop back with the DevOps teams, like looking for malicious endpoints or functionality of those endpoints that the developers didn't really know existed and shouldn't be there? Have you done anything there yet or no?
That's an interesting question. Not yet, right? We have a ping identity in general has a DevOps story, but it's not necessarily around protecting the DevOps environment or protecting that pipeline. It's more about how is our software DevOpsed, right?
Oh, yeah.
So in that space, look, if it's an API, we can protect it and figure it out. If it's not an API, we're not really looking at it today.
Got it.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
So customer, how's deployment? I mean, you said the AI engine's on-prem today.
Yep.
So what's it take to get this environment set up and running? Some plugins to the AI engine or your proxy, and that's pretty much it?
Well, it depends on how you're deployed, right? So we have the way we break it out is one is inline mode and the other one would be called sideband mode, right? Inline mode, as you can imagine, we're a proxy, right? And we're proxying all the API traffic, and as we proxy it, we can do some really interesting things, right? That's when we can do some discovery, right? We can. There's a bunch of caching. There's some interesting things we can do as a proxy, right? Sideband mode is the easiest to deploy, right? Simply because, most shops already have an API gateway of some sort, right? And they've already doubled down on the fact that they're shoving most of their stuff through pick your API vendor choice, right? Whatever it is. In sideband mode, we've done most of the integrations. We've had some of them do the integrations. We've integrated with most of the major vendors at this point, and they offload the blocking decision basically to us.
Okay.
So they send traffic hits them. They offload it to our engine. Our engine gives them back a decision. Right, and then they do the block.
Got
it. In that mode. We've got a couple of different things that have to be deployed. One is the AI engine, right? One is our data lake, right? Because we have to store this somewhere, right? And then we've got our proxy that runs in non-proxy mode, basically, that does a bunch of that data, right?
Got it.
So make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It's not a hard deployment.
Yeah, and if you're doing the proxy, then all that other stuff's embedded in there. Your AI engine and the data lake's all part of your proxy. But when you're doing the side channel, you've got to integrate that all into the AI engine and into your data lake to do all that decision processing, et cetera.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
From a value perspective, where's the value to the customer by implementing Ping's API security?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, first and foremost, we've seen a couple of different things, right, from our customers, right? Some of them just immediately get it and they go, well, I have to have that. And in general, it's kind of the reporting piece they want to see up front, right? It's, I want to put this thing in front of my APIs and see what's really happening, right? And then we've had, certainly somebody may have had a breach, right? And now they have to do something about it. And when that happens, the value is obvious.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So our customers today, they all look at it and they go, wow, we need this, mostly for visibility, but some of them actually need it because something bad happened. Right. Yeah. So,
and to me, it's around visibility and then ultimately control. Right.
Yeah.
And if you can prove value on those two dimensions, then you've built a great product.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If people want to learn more, where should they go?
Simple, pingidentity.com.
Awesome.
Right. Yep.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
And with that, we'll take a break and come back and see you soon.